Hey everyone, welcome to this edition of our iCode video blog. And what I wanted to cover on this video was the question that always or very frequently comes up: can I bill a 99250 fundus photography with a retinal or macular OCT on the same day? And there are common ways that people will do it. Sometimes they'll get reimbursed for those combined procedures. There are ways that I think, based on the documentation that is available to us from entities like CMS, I think there's better ways to do it. So we'll discuss the common ways that can be done that I think are probably not the best way, and also the ways that you can achieve payment for both procedures in certain clinical situations. So let's discuss those here. The full question that I'll see, it looks something like this. I have a patient who has moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and macular degeneration. I want to take a photograph to evaluate and monitor the retinopathy for changes, and I also want to obtain a macular OCT to ensure there is no fluid from macular degeneration or diabetic macular edema. Can I just bill the fundus photograph with the ICD code for the moderate diabetic retinopathy and a retinal OCT with the ICD code for macular degeneration? And so if we looked at the way that this billing would look to a payer, it would look similar to this, where we would have the 92014, so let's say any office visit could be a 99 code, that would go to your diabetic retinopathy along with your 92250, so your fundus photo. And then oftentimes what you'll see people do is they will utilize a 59 modifier on a 92134, and they'll link that to a different code, in this case macular degeneration. But this is really not the intent of a 59 modifier. If you want more detailed explanation of 59 modifiers, we'll talk about them in an upcoming blog, and there's a really thorough discussion in iCode billing and coding course that will discuss all the modifiers. But bottom line is that if we look at the definition of what the modifier is used for and CMS's interpretation of that modifier, which can help us know how we're going to use that for other insurance plans as well, let's take a look more detailed at that. And again, the links for these citations, these quotations, are within the text version of this weekly blog. So basically, CMS says, under certain circumstances, it may be necessary to indicate that a procedure or service was distinct or independent from another non-evaluation and management service performed on the same day. And a 59 modifier is used to identify these procedures that are not normally reported together, but are appropriate under the certain circumstances. They go on to say that documentation must support a different site or organ system. However, when another already established modifier is appropriate, it should be used rather than the modifier 59, only if no more descriptive modifier is available, and the use of 59 best explains the circumstances should the 59 modifier be used. So I think what people will do in the previous example that I just gave you is they'll look at this and they'll say documentation must support a different site or organ system, and then they'll use the 59 modifier to go along with the macular OCT, since the retinal photo was in theory for the rest of the retina. But if we look further into this document, what they go on to say is that the definition of different anatomical sites includes different organs or different lesions in the same organ. So I still would say, okay, that makes sense. However, it does not include the treatment of a contiguous structure of the same organ. So it says, and then it further goes on to say, treatment of the posterior segment structures in the eye constitute a single anatomical site. And so by that definition, I don't think we can utilize the term site to justify a 59 modifier in the case of a 92134 and be able to do both fundus photos and appropriately be reimbursed for a macular OCT on the same day in this clinical situation. So if that's not going to work for us, what should we do in order to be appropriately reimbursed for this? Well, my recommendation is one of two things. One is use an advanced beneficiary notice, an ABN. And again, if you want more details on an ABN, we have them on our iCode billing and coding course that goes into the details of when you'd want to use an advanced beneficiary notice. But the bottom line for them is we use them, they're required for Medicare in situations where there is a billable procedure, but it's likely not going to be reimbursed in a specific situation. So this would be a perfect example of that. 92134 macular OCT is a billable procedure that is reimbursable by Medicare, but in the circumstance where it's linked together with a fundus photo, it is not likely to be reimbursed. So you would utilize an ABN in order to let the patient know that it's not likely going to be reimbursed and they have responsibility to pay for that. The other way, which I like quite a lot, is to separate those procedures on different days. So one example of this would be you've got the patient dilated, you want to get fundus photos at the time of the evaluation, and you can have the patient back the following day for your retinal OCT. You don't see the patient, they're just on a tech schedule, say. And then they get their OCT, and that's interpreted later on by the physician. So there's an interpretation report that's completed by the physician, say that second day. The last thing I want to comment on here is that there is a possibility that you are doing it the other way and getting paid for it the other way, not necessarily by CMS, but you may be getting paid for it by a third-party insurance. Oftentimes those insurance companies are paying, but they're not reviewing that. They're just triggering the payment because of the 59 modifier. And that doesn't make it right. If they audit you, then they may require repayment for those because their interpretation may be similar to CMS. The real reason, though, that I would recommend doing it this way for every insurance company is that it makes it standard. So you don't have to worry about if a patient has, say, Blue Cross Blue Shield or United Healthcare doing it one way, and if a patient has Medicare doing it another way. You just have a standard clinical protocol that in a situation like this, you get your fundus photos one day on the visit day, and then you have the patient back a separate day that's very close to that day that, again, as long as it's clinically appropriate, then you have that other documentation to ensure that there's no fluid in the macula. So I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you guys on the next one.